Okay, thank you. I'd like to call the Environmental Control Committee meeting to order at 7:31 p.m. Present are committee members Heeman, Glassburn, Williamson, Council President Jones, council members Broussard, Schuman, Kelly, the mayor, and the law director, and guests. We are going to discuss this evening it's a continuation discussion of sorts with regard to the letter of support that we are initiating for the flood mitigation and drainage issues that the city has. I did meet with the mayor this morning, and the administration did draft a separate letter, which is fine, which outlines a little bit more of an updated position in that the ODOT properties are listed by parcel number, which is very helpful. And in addition to that, it's more of a donation scenario. I did also ask the mayor if he wouldn't discussing the upcoming June school board meeting as part of the update to this process as well. And so, Mayor, is there, would you like to go ahead and expand on that, please?
Yes, Councilwoman Heeman. Kim Lieber is meeting with the school board members, I believe, in executive session on Thursday. So
okay,
that's all I really have to report.
And the ODOT, do you want to talk about that a little bit as well?
Yeah, exactly. Well,
that was drafted. Yeah, we can just do it all at one time.
Yeah, well, we've been, like I said, working with ODOT for a while now. Things seem to be moving ahead on some of the properties pretty positively. The one main property, we're still working with them on it. There's environmental mitigation issues, so we're going to continue to work hard on it, and we'll get it done sooner or later.
I do have just one or two brief questions.
Yep.
So, Mayor, can you just let us know on the issue of, the purchase versus the donation? Obviously, the donation is preferred. Have the conversations been extensive enough that you feel comfortable that that is the route that ODOT is willing to go with as well? Or might it revert back to you think it's, I guess my reason for asking some of these is I don't want to send a letter prematurely that would say anything until your position is kind of moved along enough that our letter then becomes helpful.
Our position has always been, and I don't think they have a position where they're looking to sell it to us. I think if it's for public use, they're happy to give it to us. It's, landlocked. They're not going to do anything with it. As long as there's no environmental issues, I have no doubt that they will donate it to us. Now with schools, maybe a little bit different, but we'll know a little bit more on Thursday, hopefully.
Well, and we appreciate that because that likely would be then a separate letter and, more to those circumstances than not. And perhaps, with a request to make it a donation versus the ODOT where it's, much more in place and moving along. So I think that I will open, unless Mary, you have something else to add, I'm going to open up the floor to questions from committee. Mr. Glassburn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a number of questions, but I'll yield to the mayor if he wants to make just broader statements to hopefully answer some of them preemptively. But I guess I'll just start with, there were a lot of questions that this committee asked about the overall plan, how this ODOT process came together in our previous meetings, and we've not really gotten a lot of response on that. So, Mayor, could you fill us in a little bit on how this project started, why we picked these properties, what our expectations are of these if we get them? Thank you.
Yeah, well, this process started quite a long time ago as we've been identifying projects and doing projects. We've identified these for the what would it be, the southwest end of North Olmsted. The problem is we don't own any of the properties, or we own very little bit of property over there. So we've reached out to ODOT. Again, when you're dealing with a government agency, it's sometimes tough to get them to listen. I think we've got their ear now, which is good. But we've really looked all over. We've talked about a bunch of different things. We really feel like that one ODOT property and the school property would be the perfect place for EQ basin, because really all your sanitary goes right there. All your sanitary on the southwest side heads right there. So it's a great place to kind of park your sanitary in these storm events, and then send it down to the wastewater treatment plant afterwards. So that area is really kind of what we're holding out for. So we hope to have something done, relatively soon, or at least give you more information soon.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Go ahead.
Mayor, you contacted a number of us, and I think it was also in the media reports that you were looking at doing public meetings to discuss flooding with small groups. What's the status of that?
Thank you, Councilman. The status of that is I believe they start on the 16th and will probably roll throughout June. We're trying to do them at Springvale out in the pavilion, but we are flexible. If Bretton Ridge wanted to do them at their pool or something like that, I'd be willing to do them there. So the presentation is nearly done besides some fine tuning, and I can forward the presentation to you, and it kind of tells you a lot of the projects that we've done and what we have kind of on the schedule. And there's still stuff we're working on too.
So are there other projects besides the ODOT and the school project that the city is looking to mitigate flooding in anywhere in the city? Yeah,
and I just had a meeting today. We talked about a lot of different things, and what I can do is I can forward all that information to you so that you can take a look at it. There's a lot of information, a lot of different thoughts of, hey, we could do this, we could do this, we could do this, we could do it all. So my position would be, for 10 years, we haven't stopped doing projects. I mean, we've done a ton of them. They've worked. We just got to keep doing more. So maybe the best thing for me to do is to send you kind of the presentation, some lists of things that we've discussed during the meetings, and then you guys will have a little bit more information than you have right now. And then maybe you would have better questions, like, you could tell, hey, what does this smoke test mean, or what does it do? And if you have the information, then perhaps you can maybe we'll have Pete come to a meeting and he could talk a little bit more about it.
Mayor, if I could, do you think that information could come at least to the committee on a rolling basis? Because it seems that, while you're doing all these things, we're not getting the information, and then it becomes difficult to know when to have a meeting or what questions we might have, because we only discover it in bits and pieces as we have this meeting from a particular issue. So a little bit more of a rolling basis would be extremely helpful. The subject matter is very important to everyone.
Yeah, well, the key thing that we've been working on is the presentation. So we're about there. So what we could do is send you that and send you all the different ideas that we're working on. And I'll send that to Chuck, and he can send it out to all of council.
Thank you. That would be very helpful.
Okay.
Madam Chairwoman.
Yes. Mr. Schuman.
I'm sorry. I'm not a committee member, but I wanted to kind of elaborate on what the mayor was saying. The mayor was good enough to meet with the homeowners association presidents for Bretton Ridge and Park Ridge this last week, and we've been collecting information from them, get a better idea who was affected, what kind of flooding, and they've both been really good about collecting information and sharing it with us. Just as a preliminary, so there's already things happening. Just to share that with you. Thank you.
Well, Mr. Schuman, that would be my point. It's not shared with us, and it should be. So while I appreciate that the homeowners are sharing, and with you and the mayor, there is a committee for that and the rest of council to consider, and it's a citywide problem. So I would very much like the sharing to be more broad, if you don't mind. Mr. Glassburn, were you finished?
No, Madam Chair. I had a couple more citywide questions, then I have Ward 2 specific, but I'll stop after the citywide and let others jump in.
Thank you. Go ahead.
So one of the other questions, and it has a unusually high impact on Ward 2, which is part of this is open ditches. In the past, I've seen dredging of ditches. I've not seen much dredging. I saw some new dredging being done last year in my ward. But what is our schedule for dredging ditches, and where are we at as part of that process in this cycle? Thank you.
Well, Councilman, when you're talking about dredging ditches, we don't always dredge ditches, but we always clean out the ditches like twice a year. So we have people walk through the ditches and clean them out. When there's a problem, we're out there right away. If we get a call and there's some sort of blockage, we're out there right away. As far as dredging, that's a little bit bigger project. We have done dredging of ditches and widening them, made them wider and made them flow easier, but that's kind of a separate project. I don't know if that answers your question.
I'll come back to it later. Last question I'll ask that's more of a citywide is, in the story on Cleveland.com about the flooding, you were quoted as saying that you didn't necessarily care about road or backyard flooding. What were you trying to communicate by saying that? Or I want to make sure I understand.
I care about basements. That's what I care about. Yeah, I mean, it's like some cities actually put hydro breaks in their storm sewers so that the street does flood. And we've actually tried that in places also. So what I would say is, look, there's no one that gets more backyard flooding than me, and it causes me absolutely no pain. But it does cause me pain when there's residents with water in their basement, and that's the most important thing. That's what I meant.
Okay, so moving forward, we're not looking at, as part of the flooding solution, anything to do with backyards or
I wouldn't say we're not looking at it. When we met with John Jark, and he talked a little bit about backyards, and his statement to me was he was looking a little bit more for direction, like, hey, can the city direct us on how to help our backyards drain a little bit easier? So yeah, I mean, we're more than happy to assist residents, but really, I think the key thing here is when every basement is dry in North Olmsted, we'll worry about the streets and backyards. You know, that really, the basements are the most important thing.
Okay, I'll yield for the moment. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Ms. Williamson, did you have any questions that you wanted to ask before we move on to? Okay, thank you. I'll open the floor to questions from council. Mr. Kelly?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mayor, the creeks, are used to help mitigate some of the flooding. Now, the creek behind my house, and it actually affects Mr. Sturgeon even more, is the bank is washing away. The city had fenced in that creek several years ago, and it's now washing away from underneath that fence and creeping toward the property that Jeff Sturgeon owns. I'm just curious, does the city have any plans to try to shore up the banks at all on these creeks so that we're not getting soil and so forth washing down into the creek when we need that water to flow?
I mean, like, did you send this in to engineering or the service department at all?
Well, if I could, I'd like Jeff to answer that because I know he's been talking with them. Would that be okay with you?
Yeah, that'd be fine.
Mr. Sturgeon, please, go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, and just for the record, because you're a guest, we'll need your address.
Jeff Sturgeon, 3092 West 231.
Thank you. Go ahead.
3 years ago, I did meet with Brian Blum, and also the county was out here. And the county, there was one of their divisions that came out here specifically for ditches. And at that time, the county recommended work to be done on the sides of it, okay? And Brian did give me a very thorough report personally, and he also requested one from the county, and I've never seen that. I don't know if he ever got one or anything as far as what the county recommended the city of North Olmsted to do for this ditch behind my property. Brian did tell me though that at that time the city had at this point had no interest of doing anything with it. If I wanted to personally do something with it myself and incur the cost, I would be able to do that. I haven't done anything with it, and I've never seen a report on it. There maybe someday it should be a discussion. I'm very familiar with the ditches of North Olmsted based on what I do for a living and my time on these ditches and stuff. And if I may just make a recommendation, I think that some of these ditches, I know of like 3 of them that are giving you guys problems that should be addressed. And maybe go back to like almost 20 years ago, there used to be a storm service department, and they somehow over the time they got blended together with the wastewater treatment plant. No? Okay.
If I can.
Yeah, yeah, unless you wouldn't want Mr. Sturgeon, were you finished, Mr. Sturgeon?
Yeah, I'm finished.
Okay, Mary, yeah,
Yeah.
then go ahead.
Thank you.
So,
Yeah, so certainly when I took over office, there was no storm crew out there, but we did. There's 8 people on the storm crew, so there's this. There's a full storm crew out there working storm, and there's a full sanitary crew out there working sanitary. So that has changed, like you said, maybe some 20 years ago. The service department was pretty depleted. So, but we've brought that back. We realize how important what's under the ground is very important to us.
Thank you, Mayor Kennedy.
Mayor, did you have something else you wanted to add?
Yeah, if I could, do you either for Councilman Kelly or Jeff Sturgeon, do you have the name of the creek that's around you? Does that have a name, or it's just around 231? That creek around 231? Is there a name of it, like the Roots Creek or the?
Mayor, I'm not sure what the name of it is, but it's directly behind my yard at 23137 Alexander, and directly behind Jeff's garage at the address he gave prior on West 231st.
Okay, well, let me check and see if there's a report there or anything. But you said maybe like 3 years ago?
Go ahead, Jeff.
Yes. Yes, there is. I can probably dig up a copy of the report from that, and it will have the name on it of that ditch, I believe, and it should give a pretty good report. And at that time, Brian also gave me a report of another ditch also too. And I know I still have copies of that report. And I did, what was it, 2 years ago or a year ago? I think Councilman Glassburn, he came out and looked at that, and he saw everything that needed to be done with that too. I don't know, but I never did see the county report, but I do know that Brian did ask the county for that report, and he did tell me that I would get a copy of that. The county was out here twice. I met Brian 3 times, and I met Brian and the county twice. And I will find you the copies of those reports that Brian gave me.
Mr. Sturgeon, if you would please submit those to our Clerk of Council, Chuck Massarolo, and then he will, distribute them to the mayor and the rest of council on your behalf. And then I believe the mayor is taking notes, as am I, so that we'll circle back with, Brian Blum at the wastewater treatment plant to, sort of put together a whole record of that. Mayor, that's correct, yes? Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Oh, Mr. Glassburn.
If no one else has anything, I'd like to resume. So, and to Mr. Sturgeon's issue, I turned that in at the time, but I don't want to belabor that one. I guess in terms of my capacity of Ward 2, the frustration I have is since 2018, when I started with this, I have persistently asked the safety service director, the wastewater treatment folks, what homes or what areas in Ward 2, specifically around the open ditch areas, the Deerfield Columbia Road area, what properties do we need to acquire? What can we do? And the answer I've consistently gotten is silence. So when I see that we had this flooding in the southern part of the city, and I empathize with it a lot, we once again had flooding in the northeast part of the city. It's really hard to go to residents and say, well, I don't know when you're going to get dredged. I don't know when there's going to be a leveling out so that the drainage actually goes down to the next house, to the next house, to the next house. I don't know when we're going to ever cap these open ditches that flood your basements and flood your homes. So I'm looking for some kind of plan that addresses those folks, at least in my area. I don't mean to be parochial, but it's been a persistent issue. So I don't know if the mayor wants to comment.
I guess my comment is, how many people in your area, in your ward, flooded? Do you know? I mean, we didn't get many calls from anyone else other than Ward 3 this time. Now, that doesn't mean that people don't flood or don't have water in the street or water in their backyard, but how many like basements? Did you get calls for that? Because when I talked to, I believe yourself and Councilwoman Heeman and Councilman Broussard, it seemed like really you guys didn't get any calls, and the calls we had coming in to the city, whether it be me or Becky or, you know, Brian Blum or the service department, were mostly in that southwest end of town. So what specifically do you have names of people that flooded this time?
Yes, I had 4 folks on Gessner. I had 6 folks on Maple. I had 3 that contacted me on Walter. I had 3 that contacted me on Columbia. I had 3 that contacted me. I think they were on Fawn in the Deerfield area. It's the usual suspects. Whenever we have a heavy rain, they get flooding. So it's, again, the commonality I keep seeing is the open ditch areas. So I'd be happy to.
Did you make sure that we had those names of those people, or do we have those names? I don't know. I assume you forwarded them on to somebody here.
I'm not sending anything in. I was waiting to find out when the meetings were happening. So, but now that you shared that, I will.
Yeah, absolutely.
Get these things connected.
Yeah, if you could. I mean, yeah, send them to me or Becky, and we'll coordinate, you know, 1 or 2 meetings with your ward.
Okay. And I guess the last, go ahead, Mr.
Look, just one more comment. You know, oftentimes when you see just a few houses in a neighborhood flood, it's oftentimes maybe something at the homeowner's house. So what we want to do is get out there, and, you know, we do have a camera truck that can go out there and check it out. In the past, we used to say, call a plumber first. Now we go out there and check it out and say, yes, this is your problem, call a plumber. So we have that ability to do that. So if there's a handful of people flooding in a neighborhood of hundreds, I think we may be able to solve that problem. But remember, in Ward 2, we've done a ton of work. There used to be pumps out on your streets, you know.
I recognize the LaBerne station, Madam Chair, if I may continue. I recognize the LaBerne station has made a substantial amount of progress, and for the developments, it does seem that the problem is largely gone. It's just these open ditch streets. Even when it lightly rains, you see standing water up to street level in front of a number of homes. And so it just doesn't have anywhere to go. And I don't know if it's a dredging issue. I don't know if fundamentally open ditches are the problem. I don't want to pretend to be an engineer. It's just, I get the same complaints every time.
And they're basement issues, right? Are they basement issues?
It comes up into the house. It's not exterior coming into the house, you know, through a window or through the sidewalls. It's coming in through the sewer system, which I guess the last comment, Madam Chair, that I was going to make is just, while I appreciate the backyards are not our problem, so to speak, if the residents do solve it, usually involves multiple residents to solve a problem, because you can't, if you just dump off, if you grade your yard, now it's going to dump off into the next person's yard. And even if they do all successfully work together, that water either is going to go into a creek that's part of our system, or it's going to go into our stormwater. So I'm hesitant to not look at, on some level, look at that as part of the solution to all this, because if those folks start dumping their water from their backyards into our storm sewers, I don't want to have new problems back into the sewers. So.
Well, and if I may, Mayor, I do have several areas that the folks have just given up trying to complain. Birch Circle and some of the areas over there where their backyards are continually flooded for various reasons. Either, you know, when the development was built, there wasn't proper drainage put in by the code at the moment. There are people over there with sump pumps on the outside of their home in their gutter drains. And we live in Ohio. So, you know, it's kind of a crazy thing to me that a sump pump's on the outside of the house. Other people fill in their backyards. I know that I've had to have the service department go and talk to people about, you can't fill in your backyard swales. So I think that at some point, while the attention, it may not be deserved right now to look at the back, I think that that should be at sort of the back end of our plan, the city's plan, because it is a valid problem and people don't know what to do. I do know that there also was a program where people could add drainage into their ditches in the front, and then they were told they had to pay for it. Now, this is when I first became on council, so I don't know a whole lot about what went on before that, but over on Kerry Lane and Allendale. So for example, there were some pipe drainage put into the ditches, and then the residents were told, well, the city would no longer pay for that. The residents started to pay for that, and then they were, I think, from what they told me, denied, you know, the permits or whatever it needed to be given to them so that they could pay for that. So I don't know if that plan is coming back, or if there's anything in the works about some of those things coming back, or they weren't useful. And I realize that's not the upfront plan with the big, you know, flood we just had in the basements, that would be, you know, the secondary or next level down. So, and perhaps if you explain some of that would help Councilman Glassburn. I don't know. Yes, no, Mayor?
I'm sorry, what is it you wanted me to, like, here's what I would suggest. People throw out a lot of things. Oh, I heard this, I heard that. Why don't we do this? Why don't we realize that here, we've worked very hard on this presentation to show everyone what we've done, and why don't we have these presentations throughout June? You guys will be on break in July, and then August we'll resume, hopefully face-to-face, where it'll be easier to bring a group in there, not a giant group, but, you know, Pete the engineer, Brian Blum, and we'll sit there for 2 hours discussing everything, you know, and they can give you exact answers.
Well, and I appreciate that, and I think we will need to have to do that.
In the meanwhile, I'll send you all the information we have.
And we appreciate that. The residents are looking more sometimes for a global plan, and so that we even are thinking about that for them, I think would be important and satisfactory to them as it moves along. I don't think that their expectation is that we will ever stop, but it seemed that things were set aside in favor of, you know, some of the EQ basins and the other, you know, the other things that were being pursued, which is fine, because it seemed to be a more major issue than some of the others.
I honestly, I don't know anything's been left behind. That's the thing. You know, let's find out the facts. Just because a resident tells you something doesn't necessarily mean it's true. I've heard everything. So I would take a step back always and get the facts, and maybe sometime early August, if things are getting back to normal, we'll have a meeting. It's a great question to ask the city's position on those things, and what have we done, and maybe bring up the resident's name, and perhaps maybe they want to do something and never did it. I don't know. Okay.
Mr. Glassburn, did that answer all of your questions? I saw your hand up. Did you have more, or you're?
I'm sorry. The only other just comment I'll throw out is I've talked to a number of residents. I see a number of residents in my ward rigging up various systems to pump the water from their backyards into either ditches or other creeks or other things to get the water out. And I'm reluctant to turn those folks in, quite honestly, because they're just trying to solve their problems. But I know that that also exacerbates things. And so if I hear, I talk to their neighbors to make sure that they're not making it worse for someone near them. But again, if in the absence of direction, the residents resort to crazy stuff, quite honestly. So thank you.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Schuman, Mr. Kelly had his hand up. Let me see if he still has a question, please.
Go ahead.
Mr. Kelly?
Oh, thank you. I just wanted to say that Alexander wasn't left unscathed in that last event either, and I'll give address to Councilman Glassburn.
Thank you. Mr. Schuman?
The planning department had a workshop, and they were planning on, actually, there would have been a second one if the COVID thing hadn't happened. And I believe they actually were preparing some kind of video in order to share information how to work on these backyard flooding issues. The reality is that if it does, if you have a continuous rain for several days, people's backyards will flood. Some people's backyards will flood, and then of course that water, if it's already there, there's nowhere for the rainwater to go, and it ends up in the house. So it doesn't do us any harm to help people. It actually does us a lot of good to help people get the water out of their backyards. And we actually have, as I say, we actually did a workshop, and I don't know if anybody attended it from council, but there is the idea is to encourage people to, and it's not always a matter of bringing dirt in. It's a matter of just putting drainage in and making sure that that functions when it's not raining, so that you get the water out. Just and that's something we again, this is something that when we discussed, Mayor and I discussed this with the two homeowners association presidents in my ward. That was one thing they asked for, was some direction, and I told them we'd already had one of these and encouraged them, if as we move forward here, we'll have more workshops. It's a good idea. It does eliminate. It's important that people take some ownership of this. It's their property. When these houses in North Olmsted were built, they were underplumbed. Jeff can tell you that. Anybody who knows anything about engineering will tell you that. I built some houses out in Avon. We had a drain in the backyard and a drain in the front yard, and they were big 8-inch drains. And you know, there's a drain in the backyard for every 4 houses in Breton Ridge, and of course these drains have all been collapsed. That they weren't maintained. The swales in the backyards were not maintained. People planted trees on them. They put fences up. These just became non-things after a while. So it does fall to homeowners to a certain degree, and that's actually something that both of these homeowners association presidents and their other board members that showed up at this last meeting, they were well aware of that, and they wanted some guidance, and I think that's something we can do if that helps you out there, Mr. Glassburn.
Thank you, Mr. Schuman. Ms. Williamson, did you have your hand up and I missed it? Are you sure? Go ahead.
I have to try to find this mic on button sometimes. I just can't get to it quick enough. No, I was just going to say, you know, there was a lot of backyard flooding over in my area, over here in another section of Ward 4. I know that, you know, the people had installed the French drains, and that seemed to alleviate some of the issue. But again, this goes to Councilman Glassburn. I know that you want to protect your residents with their pumps and their rigging in the backyards, but it would also be beneficial if you did provide those addresses so the city could see if there is some other issue that's going on over there and maybe try to rectify it. And it would benefit, I'm probably sure, more people than you think. Thank you.
Okay, any more questions or comments? Going once, going twice. Okay, I will now, what my plan is to take the letter that the administration provided and go through it and compare it, with the letter that was originally drafted, sort of merge some of the points together as they may be, somewhat different. I know, Mr. Schuman, you had a comment that you provided to our clerk of council, about our city being fully built. So we'll include that for you. And I would encourage anyone who does have any comment or addition that they'd like included in this letter to please submit that. And I will make a revised joint letter, if you will, and recirculate that for everyone's approval before we send it out, because it certainly is very important and we want to make sure that it's done correctly and stated correctly and done in the most timely fashion as is helpful to the cause of the parcels we're trying to acquire. And so if no one has anything else, I will conclude our meeting at 8:08. And I thank